Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. For those of you who are just joining us tonight, I can go ahead and tell you that we're going to talk about a number of different topics. We're going to talk about Israel and the nature of Israel. We're going to talk about a new candidate in California who's running on the economic platform that I've talked about on a number of occasions, as well as the fact that he is a candidate who's running on an anti-GMO platform. And we're going to get into the James Foley beheading video and whether or not that was fake or real, and what the purposes of it are. And of course, we're going to talk about the situation in Syria as it's developing. And of course, the show is being recorded on August the 27th, 2014, almost a week in advance of the air date. So be mindful of the fact that the facts on the ground can change in a short period of time. So again, be mindful of that. Now, for those of you who are just joining us here for the first time, please check out Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at ucy.tv. The rebroadcast is aired on Friday nights at 9. The new broadcast is Monday night at 9. Now, for those of you who would like to check out some of my work further, I write regularly for activistpost.com and also the antimedia.org, and as well as naturalblaze.com. And if you're interested in my work specifically, just my work specifically, then please go to brandonturbeville.com. Again, that's www.brandonturbeville.com. That's the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, the archive versions of this show, all the interviews that I do, and all the links to all of my books is located at brandonturbeville.com as well. You got to type in the www before the website in order to get it. So bear that in mind. And again, Truth on the Tracks, this show every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at ucy.tv. At least that's the way it is for now. And I say for now because, to be quite honest, I can see a time where this show will no longer be on the air. I can see a time where I'm no longer able to do this. I've been seeing it for some time off in the distance, and now it seems to be getting closer and closer. I don't get paid to do the show, and I don't think any other host on UCY gets paid to do the show. And I know Jules, who runs UCY, runs the network and does all the back-end stuff, and has her own show, does tons of radio herself. She doesn't get paid to do the show. And UCY can take donations, and apparently, we don't receive much. UCY doesn't receive much. I certainly don't get anything for doing the show. I'm not complaining about that, but I'm just telling you the way it is. And I know times are tough, and that money is scarce. But, if you're a regular listener to the network, you guys get a lot of information for free. And you're going to take this for granted, that it's going to be there, that all this stuff's going to be there. And in fact, we don't even have any advertisers. We don't have any advertisers on this show, and I don't think there's advertisers anywhere else on the network. So you get all this stuff for free with no advertisers. Nobody's donating. And not even a few cents. You go to Amazon link. If you order from Amazon, you can click on the Amazon link, and that's a way to support the network. And again, you're getting all this for free, advertisement free, that you don't get on any other network, as far as I know. You should support that. And if you like the work that you hear on this show, then donate to UCY. I don't take donations. You probably should, but obviously it doesn't matter. So there's no point in setting up for that. But again, I've been doing this for a long time. It feels like a lot longer, and I'm getting pretty tired. And times are tough for all of us. And I just trickle over here. I just tick on by, barely. And it's getting old. I don't know how much longer I can keep up the pace, to be honest. So, that being said, we're going to talk about a lot of different things here tonight. And I want to get into, I guess we should get into Israel first, because this is some information that I don't think most people know. Now, when you look at the situation in Israel and Palestine, you get a number of different views. Of course, you get the people on the Christian right who are of the belief that Israel is God's chosen people, and it's God's gift to the world, and we all have to believe in Israel in order for Jesus to come back, and all that stuff, all that crap. But we also have the other opposite extreme, right, where the people who want to blame Jews for everything. Israel is the center of all evil, and if a tree falls in the forest, it's because a Jew cut it down. That kind of idiocy as well. And of course, there is it goes from criticism of Israel and criticism of specific bloodlines, and this group of people who mask themselves in Judaism to actual anti-Jew hysteria, which is ridiculous. But I have an article up at BrandonTurbeville.com and ActivistPost.com which explains the nature of Israel, and it's called "The New Ulster: The Nature and Purpose of the State of Israel." Now, what we have here, I guess I should mention the fact that Tony Carlucci wrote a good article entitled "Beware Israel, the Eager Provocateur," which is up at Land Destroyer, and he referred to Israel as a stunted, militaristic faux state that depends entirely on the West for its continued existence. Well, that's true. One cannot argue about that. And Carlucci also described Israel as a forward operating base for a greater power above it, and I agree. I think that's one good way to describe it. So he basically says that Israel, this irrational belligerence that Israel seems to produce, that it's that this is the nature of a forward operating base, right? In other words, the priorities are not prosperity, they're not peace, like a nation state should be, or one would expect it to be, but it is the goal of a forward operating base is to engage the enemy, to engage forward into enemy territory. And there's been this lie that's been perpetuated over the years to portray Israel as a nation, and claiming that its belligerence and aggression is self-defense. And this is not the case. This is entirely false. Israel, as well as the West, NATO, the United States, Britain, they've created enemies, including Hamas. We've been through this on this show. That Israel is a creation of, Hamas is a creation of Israeli intelligence, and is promoted by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which themselves are partners of Israel and the West. So this is much more than what it's portrayed to be. Now, while you can describe Israel as a forward operating base, I think it goes much further than that, right? Because Israel is really a carefully constructed destabilization organ that was planned and created and implemented a long time ago, simply for the purpose of dividing and conquering the entire Middle East region, as well as fostering and initiating a global military confrontation between major world powers vis-a-vis Russia, the United States, Europe, and others, China as well, India, as well as a confrontation between the world's three big religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And in fact, you can go back to the letter that was written by Albert Pike to Mazzini, where they discussed the Third World War between the different religions, and all of this seems to be borne out as truth here in time. So we've got an article by Con Hallinan for Foreign Policy in Focus, which is essentially it's foreign policy. It's Council on Foreign Relations news magazine, and he actually gives a pretty good overview. But we'll not really go through his article. We'll just address this here as we can. The idea that 1917, the declaration, the Balfour Declaration by the British Foreign Secretary named after Arthur James Balfour, where it guaranteed a homeland for Jewish people in Palestine, this Jewish right of return, this Jewish homeland. This was not obviously a desire to right a 2,000-year-old wrong that existed in the minds of the British elite and Venetian intelligence, and of course the bloodline families and intelligence agencies. This was a cover for promoting British interests in the Middle East. This is all it was. It was a cover to encourage Christian support for the creation of Israel, because the idea that there was such a thing as a Jewish homeland was something, a Zionist state. This was something that was inserted into Christianity. It took about 100 years to even get off the ground, but once it was inserted into Christianity, it started to spread in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And this was inserted by the intelligence agencies. It was a concerted effort to do this, to create this Christian Zionism, which had never really existed. Zionism was not a part of Christianity up until the late 1800s, and I think many people would benefit by researching the history of Christian Zionism. It was not a part of Christianity. It was from the time of Jesus Christ all the way up until the late 1800s. Christian Zionism was, if it existed at all, was a very weird and minor sect. But by and large, it did not exist as a part of Christianity. Only until the late 1800s and early 1900s did that exist. Now, the narrative which was provided to the people, the average person, particularly the Christians, by the architects of the state of Israel. Again, this was entirely new to the religions. In fact, it was new to the religion of Judaism. That concept had been there, but the idea that the Israeli state would be created by bankers and governments, this was an anathema to Judaism. In fact, many Jews opposed this to begin with, and they continue to oppose it now. And so you have that. But one of the most interesting things, and this is what leads us back to the title of the article, The New Ulster. We had a book by Sir Ronald Storrs, who was the first governor of Jerusalem for the British Empire, and he wrote in his memoirs in 1937 that Israel and this mythical Jewish homeland was nothing but a pit of destabilization. Storrs, here's the quote. Let me read you the quote from Ronald Storrs. He says, "Even though the land could not yet absorb 16 millions, nor even 8, enough could return, if not to form the Jewish state, which a few extremists publicly demanded, at least to prove that the enterprise was one that blessed him that gave as well as him that took, by forming for England a little Jewish Ulster and a sea of potentially hostile Arabism." That end quote there. And I know I'm going to get a lot of requests for the citations. So that book is called The Memoirs of Sir Ronald Storrs, by, obviously, Sir Ronald Storrs, and published in 1937. G.P. Putnam's Sons is the publisher. That quote is from page 364. And you can actually pull it up on the internet if you go to my article, and I've got the link down there in the citation. So there's that. But the idea of the new Jewish Ulster in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism. What does that mean? What is Ulster? Well, Ulster was a place in Northern Ireland where in 1609 we had the English King Charles I. He concocted a plan, although presumably not on his own, to weaken the Irish resistance by a divide and conquer strategy. So what he did was he went in and he removed the O'Donnell and O'Neill clans from a specific area, and he moved in about 20,000 Scottish and English Protestants, and he formed a plantation where they're located and called it Ulster. Now keep in mind this was in overwhelmingly Catholic Ireland, so he moves out the Catholics and puts in tens of 20,000 Scottish and English Protestants there. Now, the structure of Ulster caused religious tension to become inflamed, right? There was division between religious denominations and sects. That became the order of the day. The true enemy, which of course was the British, took a back seat in the minds of all those people who were fighting over religious differences, and which one got beggar status and which one got preferential beggar status. So essentially Ulster was divided into two societies. They had the Protestants who were first class, and then they had the native Catholics who were considered second class. And the class difference was sanctioned and enforced by the British Crown. Now, after a bit of time had gone by, we had these native Irish Catholics were allowed to enter Ulster to work the land, but their presence there was entirely labor-based. It was feudalism. Protestants were granted what they called the Ulster Privilege, and this afforded them the special access to land and special access to lower rent. This is very similar to the Israeli-Palestinian positions and plans today and arrangements today. But we, as a result of all this stuff, we had resentment between the Catholics against the Protestants, and these religious differences they were codified. They were actually codified into law in 1692 under the penal laws, and these laws basically prevented Catholics from having any civil rights. It removed their ability to sign contracts. It prevented them from becoming lawyers, prevented them from hiring more than 2 apprentices, on and on and on. And the laws were actually extended to Protestants who intermarried with Catholics. So again, this is something that that reminds us of the Israeli-Palestinian setup today. Hallinan, the guy who wrote for the Council on Foreign Relations, was even forced to admit this. So we even had a quote from Edmund Burke. This is Edmund Burke's quote. He said that the penal laws were a machine of wide and elaborate contrivance, and as well fitted for the oppression, impoverishment, and degradation of a people as ever proceeded from the perverted ingenuity of man, end quote. So, once the British had implemented this religious tension and division plan, it was obviously only a matter of time before the whole nation of Ireland was subdued and the conquest of the country was solidified. This was a tactic that the British used successfully in Ireland, and they used it successfully across the world. In fact, when you go to Arabia, Saudi Arabia, and the Arabian Arab nations, this is the technique that was used by the British there with Lawrence of Arabia, who essentially armed and organized fanatics, death squad fanatics, to combat nationalistic fighters and to use them as sort of a proxy army against these nationalistic fighters and against governmental resistance of the British. So here we have that. Now, again, Con Hallinan actually addresses this issue about the Ulster laws and the comparisons that they have to the British. To the Israeli arrangement with the Palestinians. So we have this mention of the Israeli Knesset in recent years preventing Palestinians who are married to Arab Israelis from acquiring citizenship. And this is, again, a direct comparison to the penal laws of 1692 in Ulster. We had this Israeli human rights activist, Yael Stein. He called those laws racist. He called them, a denial of the fundamental right of Arab Israelis to start families. And of course, that's what it is. And even the U.S. had to publicly denounce it. Of course, the U.S. publicly denounced it, but in reality, did nothing to pressure the Israeli government to step away from that. So today we have this situation where the unemployment in the West Bank and Gaza now is over 50%, and Palestinians are considered around the most poor people on the planet. Some of the most poor people on the planet, poorest people on the planet, I guess is the proper grammar. But don't worry, the United States is trying their best to catch up. We've got an official unemployment rate now of 25%. So, trying to nip at the heels, trying to lower living standards as fast as possible. So, again, Ulster, the new Ulster, what does that mean? That means that Israel was created for divide and rule, and it was also created to to divide Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and to create tension in the Middle East. By enacting its own reign of terror against the Palestinians, and by controlling and directing the Muslim extremist groups that are going at war throughout the Middle East, Hamas and ISIS and a number of others, and by drawing the silly Western Christians into supporting military action across the Middle East and are protecting Israel against its hostile enemies, all that kind of stuff, and all the while doing that under the cover of a Jewish state. We have Israel, which is the greatest destabilizing force in the Middle East and the world. So this is a divide and conquer strategy. It is a strategy of tension. It is a strategy that will serve to guide the world into a world confrontation. And that cannot be allowed. So that is the article, please. The new Ulster, the nature and purpose of the State of Israel. It's up at activist post at BrandonTurbeville.com. So please check that article out. It's got a lot of information in it, and of course everything is cited, as all of my work is. Everything's cited. We link back to the books. In fact, that the book that I mentioned, the Sir Ronald Storrs book, is actually available for free there on the internet. The link is in the article. So one thing we're not going to go into too deeply is an article. Nanny state and police state unite to arrest boy for bringing the word gun to school. And basically this is an article I did. I did it in a very sarcastic tone. I don't know if you'd call it satire, really, but I did it in a sarcastic tone because sometimes when you write about these issues so much that it just frankly becomes boring to continue to report them, and sometimes they're so ridiculous as this incident is that you have to just make fun of it even in the article, even in the reporting of it. So basically this is the story of a 16-year-old boy in Somerville, South Carolina. He was given an assignment to write a few words about himself. He was in high school and his class was given an assignment to write a few sentences about himself as if it were a Facebook status. So the kid decides to be sarcastic and he writes, "I killed my neighbor's pet dinosaur, and then in the next status I said I bought the gun to take care of the business." So the natural reaction to the teacher was to freak out because the kid wrote the word gun on a piece of paper. And the teacher actually called the police. The police responded. They searched his book bag. They searched his locker. Of course, there wasn't a gun. Any sane adult would know that. But of course, we live in a culture where adults aren't really sane at all. The kid was being sarcastic. Anyway, I'll get to that. The kid was arrested for disturbing schools and disorderly conduct. He's actually taken to jail for writing the word gun. Now, the parent in the story, you'll find that his mom was saying, I can understand why it was alarming because he wrote the word gun and all, but it didn't have to go this far. Well, look, we've reached a point in society, in the world, where an adult in South Carolina, of all states, thinks that it's reasonable to react with concern because a 16-year-old boy writes the word gun in a sentence that is obviously ridiculous and absurd. This is the de-evolution of society. I have to say, it's not reasonable to be alarmed because somebody wrote the word gun. I don't care if he said he shot his cousin with a gun that he bought to do the business. It's not reasonable to react in this way. It's not reasonable to have a talk with the student. You read it and you leave it alone, and you go back to teaching them. I mean, you also got to wonder about the quality of education where you're telling the 16-year-olds to write a few sentences about themselves as if it were a Facebook status. I mean, you don't have more important things to do? What the hell kind of class is this? Don't you have to learn history or math or something? I mean, something beyond this? Why is Facebook entering the conversation? You see, it's not the 16-year-old boy that's got a problem for being a smartass. It's the teacher's problem for being a dumbass. It's not the boy that has a problem. It's the teacher. The teacher should be fired. A teacher that acts this way has no business being around 16-year-olds and has no business being around people in general. No business having authority. She has a problem. She has a phobia. She has an obsession. She should be fired. Police that respond and search book bags and lockers and take 16-year-old boys to jail for writing the word gun on a piece of paper and then charging them with disorderly conduct and disturbing schools, they have a problem. They have a low IQ. These people should not be allowed to have weapons because they are too stupid to use them. These people should lose their jobs. Everybody involved here should lose their job. They should apologize to this boy, Alex Stone. They should apologize to him because this is absolutely ridiculous. This world is in the twilight zone. And the woman says she understands why there was an alarm. No, you shouldn't understand why there was an alarm. The fact that you understand why it's alarming that your 16-year-old son wrote an absurd statement with the word gun in it, and it gets the teacher all hot and bothered, and the police SWAT team comes out and searches him and takes him to jail. Writing the word gun is not cause for alarm, lady. Sorry. You see, the problem is when you give in to this and you try to make concessions. You do not make concessions with tyranny. You do not make concessions with a police state. You do not make concessions when it comes to your freedom of speech. When you make concessions, they see a sign of weakness. And this is what we're seeing the results of right now. You do not make concessions. Concessions and compromise are for weaklings. Compromise and concessions are the only way to make sure everybody loses. I'm not into that. Well, go read the article up at my website at BrandonTurbeville.com. You can see it at activistpost.com as well. Read the satire if you want to giggle a little bit. We'll talk more about that on the other side. Well, actually, I'm kind of done with that now, but we will talk more about more issues on the other side. We're going to get into James Hinton running against GMOs and pro-nationalizing the Fed and pro-Wall Street sales tax in California. We'll get into ISIS and the James Foley beheading video right after this. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. I'd like to remind you that you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.TV. Now, we talked about a couple of issues on the first segment. We talked about Israel, and we talked about this ridiculous situation in Somerville, South Carolina, where a 16-year-old boy was taken to jail for writing the word gun on a piece of paper. We also got to talk about some more positive news, and this is an article I've done, Rising Political Candidate Takes Firm Stance Against GMOs. That's available on BrandonTurbeville.com, ActivistPost.com, and NaturalBlaze.com. I wrote that for that site as well. This is about a candidate who is running for the 5th District of the U.S. House of Representatives in California. And this is James Hinton. Some of you may know him. He was a professional gambler at one point, poker player. And James, he's an interesting guy. He was actually he was diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis a while back, and he was also told by his doctors that he probably had cancer in 2013. Now, he did a bunch of research on his own and did a lot of. He took some of his pharmaceutical medicines, but he also took a lot of natural remedies and eliminated GMOs from his diet. And he started eating organic foods that he grew himself. And the combination of the two, he managed to cure his psoriatic arthritis, and he also managed to cure his cancer. I mean, the doctors are now saying that he's cancer free, and he's feeling better than ever. So he knows the difference that GMOs make in someone's diet. So again, he's running for the U.S. House District 5 in California. This is the Napa Valley area. It's out there by Napa, Sonoma, Santa Rosa, Vallejo, Martinez, and Clear Lake, if you want to get an idea of where that's at. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with those places, this is the place, basically, the place where the earthquake, the 6.0 earthquake, happened last week. So he's running in that district, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. Hinton is running against Mike Thompson. Mike Thompson is an establishment Democrat, a career politician, takes lots of money from big corporations, particularly the Raytheon, I believe. Now, Hinton has been endorsed by the NRA, the National Rifle Association. He has been endorsed by the Tax Wall Street Party. But even more important than that, he's been endorsed by California voters, because California has this sort of jungle primary, right? Where instead of Democratic primaries and Republican primaries and then the general, they have a primary which is everybody is involved in the primary, and the two winners, the two people who got the most votes, have essentially a runoff in the general. Hinton, of course, is an independent candidate. Hinton came in second, so he survived the primary. Hinton won the primary, and now he's in the general race with Mike Thompson and, actually just Mike Thompson. It's just Mike Thompson and James Hinton, so we wish Hinton the best. And I had an opportunity to speak with James and ask him about his position on genetically modified foods and a couple of other things. But let me read you James's quote, because it's in the article. It says, "I support mandatory labeling of products that are genetically modified and those that contain genetically modified ingredients. People have the right to know whether or not their food was produced using GMOs. Otherwise, how can they make the decision to avoid them? You cannot make an informed decision if you were never informed to begin with." So that's his quote. So he supports mandatory labeling of GMOs. He also supports slightly more radical action, like removing government subsidies from operations producing GMOs. He also supports an outright ban on GMO cultivation. Not scientific research, not controlled environment scientific research, of course, but from the ban of cultivation of these crops for food sources for humans and animals. I'm 100% in favor of that, because these GMO crops, not only are they dangerous to humans and animals, but they can cross-contaminate the environment. They can change the environment, the ecosystem, forever once they get out there. So Hinton is a full supporter of local, organic, and sustainable agriculture. That's good. He wants to remove subsidies for these massive corporate operations that produce GMO food, but he also wants to encourage and promote the production of healthy, clean, organic crops. And he says he has a two-pronged approach to doing this. One is in parity pricing, and the other is in credit extension. And those are two things that we're in favor of here as well. Hinton wants to increase parity pricing to local, organic, traditional, and sustainable farming operations. So these farmers will be able to support themselves and actually profit by their own labor. That's what parity does. Parity essentially guarantees that these farmers don't have to spend more money producing their crops than they take in at the end of the year. Now, the second part of it is that Hinton wants to extend 0% interest credit from a nationalized Federal Reserve. What have we been talking about on this show? He wants to do that to bolster natural farming operations that are already in existence, but also to encourage the creation and expansion of new natural farms. Now, this is in stark contrast to Mike Thompson, who voted for the Monsanto Protection Act. We can't forget that. So go check him out. He's on Facebook. He's, I think it's hintonforcongress.com. Let's see. Let me get his website. It is, yes, hintonforcongress.com. 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 And his platform is all on the website as well. So go check him out and support him. The general election is coming up in November, so do whatever you can to support him. If you're interested in helping his campaign, then contact us and send me an email, anticodex@yahoo.com, and I will forward your information on over to the proper people who are interested in getting him elected to Congress. So we gotta mention this James Foley beheading, right? This was the news everywhere, the James Foley beheading. A couple things that we gotta mention about it, right? There are a number of questions surrounding the authenticity of this video, and I think this by now, by the time you listen to this show on Monday night, will have been largely established, right? Here's a question. Here's some of the questions. Beheadings in general are not unbelievable, right? Beheadings are not foreign to the Syrian crisis. This has happened on a number of occasions. One of the questions, though, with regards to the James Foley beheading, and this, you can be up in the air about, right? Some critics have said that Foley seems really calm, really collected in this video, especially given the fact that he's about to be beheaded. Not a good way to go. But he seems really calm in the video. Now, that could be one or two reasons. It's well known that when people are going to be killed, they know they're going to be killed, that there's this strange calm and sense of peace, and I guess the inability to stop it, so you become at peace with it. That happens to some people. Others react differently. But it also might be because Foley knows that he's not going to be killed, right? That this is actually just a clever propaganda video. And I think that it is just a clever propaganda video. Now, and I'll give you the evidence here. We have the first news organization to report on this that I'm aware of is the Syrian Free Press, and I happen to agree with their analysis, right? The Syrian Free Press writer slowed the video down, and he saw that the death squad fighter cut back and forth, the knife went back and forth across the throat about 10 times. I was unable to slow it down, but I saw at least 7 times that the knife went back and forth across the throat. But there's not one drop of blood in that time. Now you think about rolling a knife, even a dull one, across a human throat 7 to 10 times. You will get blood. It's almost unbelievable. It's not even really fathomable that there would be no blood in this type of execution. Now, we also have this issue of the fact that the actual beheading is censored. Now, I've seen a lot of beheadings. I have watched numerous beheadings from Syria and other places, and there have been, because I study it, just to clarify, none that I know of have ever been censored by ISIS or any of these other death squad organizations. The purpose of a beheading video is to create fear, to create outrage, all of that. If it's censored, that's counterproductive. It doesn't achieve those goals. So why would it be censored? So, all right, bear that in mind. Now, let's look also, I've got another article of experts, Foley beheading video stage. We've got a number of experts who have looked at this video. And one of them, this was reported in the Telegraph by Bill Gardner, who wrote the article. And he says that forensic evidence of the film indicates that the British jihadist was a frontman, not the killer. Now, what he says is that after studying the video, and he had his experts, a forensic analyst, look at the video, and he says that no blood can be seen even though the knife is drawn across the neck at least 6 times. After enhancements, the knife can be seen to be drawn across the upper neck at least 6 times. With no blood evidence to the point, the picture fades to black. Sounds allegedly made by Foley do not appear consistent with what may be expected. During Foley's speech, there appears to be a blip which would indicate the journalist had to repeat a line. One expert commissioned to examine footage was reported as saying, "I think it has been staged. My feeling is that the execution may have happened after the camera was stopped." End quote. So basically, the analysts who watch this and Gardner say that it's fake, but they want to continue with the company line. They want to say that this execution did take place, just not on camera. It took place after the after the camera was shut off. Of course, that stands against the logic. If the jihadists were going to kill Foley, what could they have gained by editing out the most gruesome part of the video? Why would ISIS fake the killing, then really kill the guy, and then only spread around the fake version of the execution? This doesn't make any sense. Now, I understand that ISIS is made up of a group of animals, of apes, who are not mentally capable of really doing anything properly. But let's face the facts. This was fairly decent editing. And speaking of which, we have Brown Moses. This guy is supposed to be a Syrian expert. This guy tweeted out early on that this beheading is real and all that kind of stuff, and anybody who says it's fake is a conspiracy theorist. And then hours later, he was forced to retract, but he didn't retract. He just put out a tweet that said, "Wow, we have underestimated ISIS's ability to fake a video." So in other words, he just put out he contradicted himself within 24 hours. But hey, with the attention span that America has, why would you retract? They won't remember it anyway. So what we got to remember in terms of the video, in terms of ISIS, the perpetrators, right? We got to remember that the United States and that NATO and as well as the Israelis, but especially the U.S. and NATO, control ISIS, right? The U.S. mainstream media wants to present ISIS as some shadowy military force that's located in caves, and they fund themselves using Twitter donations. But what the reality is that ISIS was the creation of NATO in the West, and it's still under the control of these groups. It's still in control of the U.S. and NATO. Now, back in 2011, early as 2007, early as 2005, actually, we know that the U.S. has been arming, funding, and supporting terrorist groups, including the Muslim Brotherhood, to overthrow the government of Syria, as well as engaging in terrorist acts against Hezbollah in Lebanon. So there we have that. So we have articles by Seymour Hersh, The Redirection, in 2007. We've also got an article by Michael Hirsch and John Barry in Newsweek in 2005, entitled "The Salvador Option," where this is mentioned. And we also see the connections. We got a map. I've got a map in the article that is actually taken from Tony Carlucci over at Land Destroyer, where it shows you the supply lines where the terrorists who were armed, directed, and trained by the United States and NATO, paid by Saudi Arabia, trained in Jordan, and deployed from Turkey into Syria and from Syria into Iraq. We can see the supply lines where they come from Turkey into Syria and then through Iraq. So this is all pretty apparent if you want to look at it. So we also had the idea of non-lethal aid being sent to these terrorists, right? This is including the vehicles that we see ISIS driving around in. It makes them so difficult to fight. As Carlucci points this out, they didn't take this gear from moderates. There weren't any moderates to take it from, because there are no moderates in the Syrian destabilization. There are no moderates in the Syrian crisis, because these moderates simply do not exist. So they're all fanatics. So what do we got to remember here? ISIS is the product of NATO and the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council. This goes back as far as 2005. We got to remember that. So let's point out one other issue here. the propaganda of James Foley's abduction was used early on to blame Assad. Let's not forget that. When Foley was originally abducted, it was widely publicized that his captors were the Syrian government. Now, this was ridiculous, and it was recognized as ridiculous by most legitimate researchers, who pay attention to the Syrian crisis. But, typically the American people bought it hook, line, and sinker. The American people buy anything. There is almost no depths to which the American people will not sink in their stupidity in terms of propaganda. With the release of the video, they are now claiming that he was beheaded by ISIS. And the American people don't even have the attention span that reaches back to see when they were told that Foley was kidnapped by Syria. So it goes in and out, but at a subconscious level. It's just like 1984. You can change the news day in and day out. Nobody even knows this. So we had articles like Business Insider by Michael B. Kelly, who was claiming that Assad handed Foley over to ISIS. Why? Why would Assad do that? Assad wants to destroy ISIS. He's been destroying ISIS. Assad's killed more terrorists than the United States ever has. So this is absolutely ridiculous. So what is the goal? The goal is it's propaganda. The goal is an American bombing of Syria. You should know this if you listen to this show. It's a shameless piece of propaganda. NATO is not letting a good crisis go to waste. Basically, it's to drum up support from the American people for a bombing campaign or limited airstrikes inside Syria for the purpose of creating a buffer zone. This is what NATO has desired since the destabilization began in 2011. In earnest, began in 2011. So, the reason that ISIS was allowed to seize territory across Iraq was so that it could create a justification for the eventual invasion of Syria and the reinvasion of Iraq and the destabilization of the Iraqi government to get rid of Maliki and to break the Iraq, Iran, Syrian, Lebanon connection, the alliance that was formed and forming further. So this is the reason. What is the reason for bombing Syria? Is it a stepping stone to Iran? Yes, but it is also a stepping stone to Russia. Remember, Anne Marie Slaughter, the former State Department Special Planning, I believe, is what her title was. State Department. She was in the State Department, and it's embarrassing, but I can't remember her title. But she wrote an article where she argued that Putin is too strong in Ukraine to attack him in Ukraine, so you have to attack him in Syria, where he's weaker. What she's betraying are two things. One, that the ultimate goal is to attack Putin in some way, shape, or form. The second is that she is an adherent to the Brzezinski doctrine. And, of course, I guess we can add a third, the fact that the Brzezinski doctrine has been implemented with the idea of micro-states and mini-states, but also proxy army and geopolitical proxy wars. So this is what Anne Marie Slaughter has to say. That was their op-ed piece. So there's that to pay attention to. And of course, what do we have in the news? Now we have the fact that the United States has launched surveillance flights over Syria. Now, here's something that I want to point out in the remaining few minutes that we have. All right, we have right on schedule. We have the United States initiating surveillance flights over Syria, and this is manned and unmanned drones surveillance flights. Also, U-2 spy planes. Now, we had the announcement that this was taking place. We had reports in the New York Times of this on Monday. The flights actually took place over the weekend. But we also had statements coming from Syrian Foreign Minister Muallim, who said that although Syria was open to cooperating and coordinating with any interested party that wanted to take strikes against ISIS, of course they would, that any unilateral attacks, airstrikes on Syrian territory would be considered an act of aggression, and that so he also suggested that these flights could be shot down. The Obama administration, of course, is suggesting that the surveillance flights could lead to airstrikes inside Syria. So what does Moallem say? He says any violation of Syria's sovereignty would be an act of aggression. He goes on to say that could, in terms of shooting down the planes that engage in the airstrikes, he says that could happen if there was not prior coordination. So there we are. That's reasonable, of course. So what are we to believe, though? Is this going to be an airstrike against ISIS? Of course not. It's going to be an airstrike against Assad. So the idea is that there will be airstrikes inside Syria. We've talked about this before. The justification is going to be airstrikes. You can't put handcuffs on the troops. That's why they've got to cross the border from Iraq into Syria to fight ISIS in Syria. Can't let them get refuge in Syria in the territory that they've seized there. But you also just can't worry about other nations' sovereignty when you want to fight this enemy. So we've got to do that. But what's the argument? We're going to have a buffer zone. Again, I mentioned this a second ago. This is what NATO has wanted since 2011. So I just went through the fact that ISIS is controlled by the United States and by NATO. Why is that important? Well, obviously we know why it's important. But here's a little tidbit of information. As the United States and NATO are talking about an air attack on ISIS, on Syria, by the way, on Syrian territory in the east of Syria, we have an ISIS attack on the Takba air base, which is in East Syria. This is Raqqa province. This is one of the largest air bases of Syria in the eastern part of the country. So what we have, while there is this debate about whether or not to have targeted airstrikes inside Syria, the death squads destroy the air defense capability of the Syrian government in the east of the country. So let me repeat that. After the Pentagon had stated that one of the biggest threats to an airstrike operation in Syria is the Syrian government's air defenses, ISIS removes those air defenses. What does that tell you? Well, certainly I hope I don't have to spell that out for you. It should be pretty clear. ISIS, being the proxy army that it is launching the attack for the Anglo-Americans to remove the Syrian air defenses so that the Anglo-Americans then could launch a successful strike inside Syria, thus creating a buffer zone and an even deeper staging ground for these terrorists to launch attacks inside the nation of Syria. So there you are with that. Now, we've only got a few minutes left in the show here. I think we've got about 3 minutes left. And again, I want to mention that, first of all, you should go check out James Hinton, hintonforcongress.com. And I also want to remind people that if you're in the Florence, South Carolina area, if you're passing through on a Tuesday night around 7 p.m., 311 West Palmetto Street, Florence, South Carolina, 29506, that is the Health First Chiropractic Center. And on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. they have DVD viewings, health talks, and meetings. So if you're interested, they also talk about things like chemtrails, vaccines, fluoride. So if you're interested in meeting people who have like minds, then please stop on by. And if you just simply want to get more information and you on some of these issues, then stop on by, watch some of the DVDs, and ask some questions. And they usually have some snacks out there as well, so please check that out. Again, don't forget, guys, please donate to UCY if you can. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, that times are hard all over the world, and I understand that money's tight, and especially in the alternative media, every time you turn around, you're being asked for money somehow. Buy my DVDs, buy my books, donate here, get a subscription there. It gets old after a while, but You guys, especially the regular listeners, you're getting tons of information for free. No advertisers. The hosts don't make money. The owner doesn't make money. The programmers don't make money. This is all a work of a labor of love, I guess. But eventually people can't go hungry because other people want things for free. And as usual, in these types of situations, people only miss something when it's gone. One day you're going to wake up and this show's not going to be here. And again, as I said at the beginning of the show, I can kind of see that day coming closer and closer. You're going to wake up, you're going to turn on UCY, and it's not going to be there because you can't keep up this pace, just trickling over. Eventually, you're going to get hit with some type of financial issue, and you got to have money coming in to handle it. And again, I'm not trying to pass the hat around or beg, but it's just the way of the world. So if you value the programming that's here, if you value the work that people on this network do, then support it. If you're going to order on Amazon, then just go to ucy.tv first, click on the Amazon link, and order your stuff. It only takes 5 seconds out of your day to do that. You're going to order anyway. If you got an extra $1, just donate $1 with PayPal. Just $1. You can't even get a cup of coffee for that anymore. Just $1. And send it to UCY. And I won't make any money off of that either, by the way. So I'm not trying to make money and drum up business for myself. But I'm just telling you, you can't keep up this pace forever without some type of financial benefit coming in. Some of us are getting pretty tired of what we do. So there's that. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you learned a little bit from the information tonight. Again, go check my website out, BrandonTurbeville.com, and keep listening to Truth on the Tracks every Monday night and Friday night here at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, ucy.tv. This has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
September 1997, Khalid Mashal was hours, perhaps minutes away from dying. He'd been walking on the streets of Amman, Jordan, when two men, later reported to be agents of Israel's intelligence agency, the Mossad, injected or sprayed him with poison.
I heard a loud noise in my ear. It felt like an electric shock.
The Israeli agents were captured. Jordan's king reportedly threatened to put them on trial if the Israeli government didn't provide an antidote. The White House even intervened. President Bill Clinton, trying to keep peace between Jordan and Israel, pressured Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to provide the antidote. Netanyahu, widely reported to have ordered the hit on Mashal in retaliation for suicide attacks in Israel, relented. Mashal was revived.
Once he survived this attack, this leader who was previously relatively unknown became very popular. His stature goes straight to the top. He's the living martyr.
Mashal is now the leader of the Hamas movement. He recently spoke to CBS News.
لدينا قضية تحرر وطني. We are not fanatics. We are not fundamentalists.
But one Israeli official calls the 58-year-old former teacher the Osama bin Laden of Hamas. Analysts say he's an inspirational commander for attacks and a deal maker, securing status and money for Hamas from his home in Qatar.
That is the ATM of Hamas right now. The Qataris provide significant funding to Hamas, and Khalid Mashal is the point man for that.
The Qataris deny that.
Qatar does not support Hamas.
It's not clear how much control Mashal has over the military wing of Hamas, which launches the attacks on Israel. And street cred is an issue for Khalid Mashal. He's reportedly been to Gaza only once, and the Israelis themselves may be trying to undermine Mashal's standing within Hamas, painting him as an insulated, pampered jihadist.
For more news, visit PaidMyNews.com.
This is Ozzy Staples.